Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the iSECURE Cybersecurity Conference Grand Finale Encore, where today we welcome our very own iSECURE Cloud Security Engineer, Rohan to demystify cloud security and compliance. Just a few things to note if you haven't been on the Encore series webinars that we've been hosting every Wednesday this month, that this webinar, just like the others, will be very interactive. During Rohan's presentation, there will be a few poll questions that I will launch to the audience. So please go ahead and, give us your feedback. Also, please type any questions that you may have in the chat. And at the end of the presentation, I'll be sure to read them aloud for Rohan to address. Like I said, participation will be rewarded, and everyone who has participated within the polls and the survey feedbacks, we will be selecting one of you for a Dunkin' Donuts gift card. So at this time, I am super excited to introduce our very own Victoria Turner, account executive at iSECURE, to say a few things. So take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Davina, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Before we hand the floor off to Rohan, I wanted to run through a few slides to let everyone who isn't familiar know who we are at iSECURE, what we do, and a little bit about how we do it. We are a cybersecurity-focused company that's been in business since 2010. At iSECURE, our goal is to proactively expose business risk to help our clients make a proper investment. Our mission is to inspire cybersecurity culture through education and collaboration. We do this by testing all of our products in-house before potential customers. We focus on the education piece by hosting information newsletters or keeping our social media platforms up to date on the latest topics in this ever-evolving industry. At iSECURE, we have a team of engineers on staff. Our senior engineering team all have over 20 years of experience in the cybersecurity space with expertise specifically in compliance and risk. Outside of our senior engineers, our engineering team as a whole are all cybersecurity focused. A little bit about the services that we offer here. As I mentioned previously, we deal heavily with compliance aspect of cybersecurity, offering compliance reviews and audits. We offer web application pen testing, as well as vulnerability assessments and pen tests paired with a gap analysis. So you'll be able to see the progress that you've made over the years you've been with us. We offer cloud security assessments in consulting, as well as hybrid and multi-cloud security solutions, the hot topic of the day. And we have experience with AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. iSECURE offers an in-house vCISO if you're looking to either expand your IT department or simply have an experienced resource there for you to lean on. Next, we have a compliance management service, which can kind of be tied in with the policy development piece. In addition, we offer managed services as well as tabletop exercises just to make sure that your incident response plan is up to date and everyone understands the protocol in the event of a breach. We also offer phishing campaigns and user awareness training to educate your employees on what to look for in possible phishing emails. Here's a list of a few of the compliance frameworks that we deal with. We do have a list of 20+ crosswalks that we can tie back to our cybersecurity framework, which is NIST. So if your compliance framework isn't listed here, I'm sure that we have experience dealing with it. At iSECURE, we take a holistic approach to cybersecurity, so we make sure that we have a solution for all layers of defense. Those layers include perimeter security, network, endpoint, application, and also data security. We are a value-added reseller, and here are a list of the partners that we have longstanding partnerships with as it pertains to this specific layer of defense. Certainly, last but not least, here are a list of our certifications. I did want to highlight a couple here. Off to the left, you will see that we do have an AWS engineer, certified engineer on our staff who will be speaking with you today. And In addition, we are nationally recognized as a certified woman-owned business as well. Off to the right, you'll see our different security certifications. You can kind of scroll down through those. And if you want to look more in depth at those, we'd be happy to share this presentation with you. And if you have any questions, please reach out to your respected representative, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Victoria. So at this time, I'd like to just turn center stage over to our very own cloud security engineer, Rohan Mode, who will be sharing his screen and there he is. Good morning, Rohan.
Good morning. Let me just quickly share my screen so that we can get going.
Wonderful. We see it.
Perfect. So good morning, everyone. I hope you are all enjoying the educational journey that iSECURE has organized in the past couple of weeks. I am Rohan Mode, cloud security engineer here at iSECURE. As Divina already mentioned that I am AWS certified and I just completed my master's degree from Rochester Institute of Technology in cybersecurity. So let's talk about demystifying cloud security and compliance. So let's get started. What you will learn today. So what exactly is cloud computing? What are the differences between public, private, and hybrid cloud? What is the shared responsibility model? What sets cloud compliance apart from traditional compliance? And at last, how continuous compliance can be achieved in a phased approach with assessments that iSECURE is performing for all your cloud environments. And at last but not the least, we will show you a demo of how to achieve continuous compliance via automation in AWS environments. So let's get started. So what exactly is cloud computing? How do you perceive clouds? Clouds are not the smoky clouds or the real clouds in the actual environment. But let's take an example. Let's say you plan a vacation and you have booked a resort for an entire week. What are you going to utilize? You're going to utilize whatever services that you require from in the entire span of your accommodation and utilize them for a specific period of time. At the end of the vacation, the facility will generate an entire list, a summary of the cost that you utilize for the services for the specific period of time. The same goes with cloud computing. So all the cloud service providers, say Amazon Web Services, Azure, or Google, they provide various sorts of resources, hardware resources or software resources, and you are charged based on what resources you utilize for what time. So basically following the pay-as-you-go or subscription model. All these major cloud providers basically maintain large infrastructures or data centers which are geographically distributed across the globe. Divina, I would like you to launch the first poll question.
All right, I just did. We'll see what the answers are.
Yeah, I could see 50% of the people say that their cloud posture today is hybrid, which is good, which is trending now, because you have to utilize both the resources to get the most of both the worlds, the private and the public cloud. So let's talk about cloud deployment models now. Just a second.
So I just went ahead and I shared those for you. The answers to the poll questions. And then I will.
Perfect. Sounds good. So let's talk about the cloud deployment models. So let's take an example to understand this better. Let's say we are three friends, Rohan, Priyanka, and Bob, and we have an outstanding garden in our backyard. So, and everyone decides a different strategy on how to utilize that garden and its resources. So let's say at first, Rohan wants to make the garden publicly available to everyone so that anyone in the entire city can utilize the resources in the gardens. Maybe they can plant their trees or flowers, etc. But however, Priyanka, on the second, she has a stunning garden, so she wants to keep it private. And only specific family members and her friends can utilize the resources within the garden. And at the last, Bob, he wants to achieve and have both the majority things from public as well as the private resources. So he makes the strategy to utilize 50% of the garden as private resources where he's cultivating pricey plants which he's selling out in the world. And whereas the 50% of the garden he has turned into public resources so that anyone can utilize the resources in that space. Similarly, it goes with public, private, and hybrid cloud. So public cloud is basically offered by third-party providers like Amazon, Azure, and Google, which is available to anyone on the internet and which scales quickly and conveniently to achieve all sorts of good things like high availability, disaster recovery, and fault tolerance within a single click. And in private cloud, which we can say either corporate cloud as well, which is specifically for the employees of that organization who wants only their employees to access resources within their infrastructure and has better and greater security controls to safeguard their information. Whereas hybrid clouds, when you want to achieve most of both the worlds in public and private cloud, you have hybrid cloud. It's basically a combination of public and private cloud, and which shares security responsibility and controls sensitive data and controls mainly sensitive data and processes. Now let's understand cloud service model. So infrastructure as a service goes the first. So let's take an example. Let's say you want to buy a laptop. What are you going to do at the first? You're going to look for the configurations of the laptop. What kind of CPU you want, what kind of RAM you want, what kind of storage you want. The same goes with all the major cloud providers. They are providing you infrastructure as a service, which basically consists of physical servers, CPU, RAM, and storage. They are providing you with the underlying infrastructure. Now, let's say you have the underlying infrastructure. What comes next? You need to have a platform on top of which you can build solutions. There comes platform as a service. So what is exactly the platform on top of your hardware resources of a laptop? It's your operating system, be it Linux, Windows, or Mac OS, etc. Cloud providers provide various operating systems, compute services, and machine images for you to utilize them in order to perform various applications on top of it. Now you have the infrastructure, now you have the platform. Now what comes on top of it? You need to utilize some sort of applications to make your business easy and scalable. The best example for that is Salesforce or Office 365, which comes under software as a service. So now moving on to cloud security.
So, yeah, before we go ahead and do that, I'd like to put out another poll question. And again, your participation is rewarded.
Sure. Oh, so I could see that a lot of people are saying that I, as a customer, are responsible for protecting all the data. We'll discuss about it in a while.
So what I'll do is I'll go ahead. I'm going to end that poll, and
sure.
we can share those results.
I could see that 70% of the people say that I, as a customer, am responsible for protecting all the data in the cloud. Let's talk about it. So this is an IT department or an organization which completely moved their infrastructure from on-prem to cloud. And this is a funny anime where the people are saying that ever since we have been on cloud, he's been on cloud9, because the IT department is completely thinking that we are completely same. It's the cloud service provider's responsibility to safeguard our resources, but it's not the case. It's a myth. So let's take an example to understand this better. Let's say you are moving into a new apartment where the rental facility is providing you with all sorts of security services, say security guard, say security cameras, or better alarm systems. But what if you left the door open for your apartment? Anybody can easily sneak into your apartment, steal your valuables, and anonymously go, and you cannot do anything about it. The same goes with cloud and its security. So security of the cloud and security in the cloud are two different terminologies. Here we can see that all I know is the boss said we had to monitor the cloud, and he's actually monitoring the cloud. So security of the cloud is basically the responsibility of the cloud service provider, which they have to provide all the security based practices for the underlying infrastructure or the resources that they are providing for all the tenants or the customers to utilize. Whereas the other individual says that got no worries, got no case, I have put them all into cloud storage. And he thinks that everything now, all my data is in cloud storage, it's their responsibility. But no, that's not the case. Security in the cloud is the customer's responsibility to follow all the security-based practices, configure every security setting so that you are safeguarding the data inside the cloud and not off the cloud. Now let's talk about security misconfigurations. So what are basically security misconfigurations or cloud security misconfigurations as a whole? So let's say one day, any of an individual, he's too tired and they are moving all their on-prem data to S3 bucket. And due to a hurry, it took the entire day for them to move all the data onto the S3 bucket. But at the end of the day, they forgot to click one check mark to make that bucket private. And now all the data is publicly available to everyone on the internet and anyone can access it. Those are certain misconfigurations which are basically because of human error or by mistake. So for example, Pegasus Airlines suffered a breach of 6.5 terabytes of data because of an unsecured AWS bucket. They left the bucket out open to the public. Microsoft Power Apps misconfiguration exposes data for 38 million records, another misconfiguration. Over 80 US municipalities suffered massive data breach. This was basically they left an AWS bucket publicly out open to everyone. And the last, 8 million UK shopping records exposed to the web, customers' personal info was leaked. This is because they unchecked an SSL certificate, and the list goes on. Now let's talk. We already have had the conversation about shared responsibility, that the cloud provider and the customer both are sharing the responsibility on how to maintain their infrastructure and keep it secure. So everything in the violet you would see is the customer's responsibility, and everything in the yellow you would see is the cloud service provider's responsibility. So as we already know that on premises, customer is whole and sole responsible for the security from starting from the physical infrastructure to user access and identity. However, in infrastructure as a service, the cloud providers are responsible for the underlying infrastructure, physical infrastructure, hardware infrastructure, and the virtualization and networking tied to it. Whereas the customer is responsible for the guest OS to the user access and identity. And in platform as a service, now the cloud providers are providing you with the guest OS. For example, say Amazon Machine Image, AWS is providing Linux to AMIs for the customers to utilize right away and deploy their applications on top of it. So they are responsible for physical to the guest OS infrastructure. But if again, the customer is responsible for application to user access and identity. And at the last, most of the cloud providers are providing software as a solutions, which consists of the application as well. For example, Salesforce, Office 365. All the underlying infrastructure from the physical to the application is the cloud service provider's responsibility. However, you are still responsible for the data and how do you manage the user access, user identity and access management. So what is the strategy? iSECURE always recommends all of our customers to go with defense in depth. So why defense in depth? So let's dive deep into it. So data is the most important part that every organization is trying to safeguard. They don't want the data to go outside. They don't want any threat actor to infiltrate their systems and get the most important thing is the data. So where the data lives? The data lives in a database. So how are you managing the access control for the database? The database needs to be in your private subnets or private firewalls where no public access is allowed. So where on top of what databases are launched on any of the compute services. So how are you managing the operating system logins for these compute services? The compute services might be Docker, Kubernetes, AWS, machine AMIs, Amazon EC2, etc. And on top of this, what do you have? An application which is being deployed on the virtual machines, which interacts with the database to access the data. So how are you managing the user logins for the applications? How are you managing the internal network or the security groups or say firewalls? How are you managing the access of the semi-permeable membrane to allow the inbound as well as the outbound traffic? On top of it comes the perimeter security. How are you providing various rules? How are you creating various rules in your web application firewall so that it can thwart some sort of traffic and can allow only specific traffic into your applications? And on top of it comes identity and access management. How are you managing the user access? How are you providing the least privilege access, role-based access, or the zero trust access to all the users, all the resources in the cloud? So Bob Kelka has already mentioned that the right user need to have right access for the right reason. for the right data. However, in cloud, I would say that the right resource need to have right access to the right data for the right reason. Because everything is between, every communications in cloud happens not only between the users, but within the resources as well. So how do you manage that? And then at last but not the least, policies, procedures, and awareness training will always be there, be it on premises or traditional infrastructure, be it cloud. So how are you creating all the policies and procedures, and how are you training all your employees to be aware of the latest threats and how to manage them? Now let's talk about cloud versus traditional compliance. So now physical security is not a primary concern because we have shared that responsibility, and it's the responsibility of the cloud service provider to safeguard their physical aspects in the data centers. But what are you going to do about the dynamic and scalable environments that cloud has to offer? You can spin up thousands of resources in a single click and destroy thousands of resources in a single click as well. So how are you going to manage that? How are you going to manage that in terms of tracking those configurations, and how are you going to manage that in terms of tracking the compliance for each and every resources? How are you going to look for the multi-tenancy and data isolations? Since I already explained that on public cloud, you are utilizing the backend infrastructure with all other people. So let's say any other organization who has their servers on the same rack that your organization has and suffered a breach, how are you having the data isolation and different security controls in place so that it does not transfer the risk to your environment? And how are you auditing the entire assessments? Are you doing any assessments? Are you doing any compliance requirements for the cloud? And how are you transparently sharing with all the employees to follow it? So now let's talk about NIST controls. iSECURE always recommend NIST controls that we have because which is the cybersecurity foundational controls, and cybersecurity foundational framework, and we have aligned it to Cloud Control Metrics CCM version 4. So let's understand what are the 5 NIST controls. The first comes identify. So in identify, we are basically helping you to identify where your sensitive data resides in terms of scanning, identifying all your assets and resources and inventorying them so that you know what are the risks tied to each and every resources, to identify where your critical data lives and where your critical data is not there, so that you have more security controls where the critical data is there. So once you identify, we go into the protect phase. Here we implement the security controls and all the access controls for the risks identified into the last phase. And we implement all the data protection controls as well. Everything is implemented. How do you detect it? We have to have some sort of detection mechanisms like monitoring, logging, and alert mechanisms so that we get to know what exactly is going with all the protected mechanisms that we have in place, or if there is any kind of malicious activity on our infrastructure. So once that is done, let's say based on this monitoring services, you get various logs, and based on the results of the detection mechanisms that we have in place in the previous phase, we are now starting to respond to various events. Need to have an incident response plan. Let's say there are multiple incidents that are happening on day-to-day basis. How are you going to inculcate all those incidents into an incident response plan? How are you going to make sure that the communication is there within every single employee in the organization, be it any department, development, operations, or maybe HR, how they are communicating with each other, what problems they are facing, and everything should be documented into incident response plan. iSECURE will help you to create such incident response plan even for your traditional as well as for cloud environments. So now let's say everything was in place. You tried to have everything from the left of the boom, but still the boom occurs. You got breached, you had an incident, somebody shut down your resources. Now, with all the controls in place, how are you going to have the recovery planning? How are you going to deal with that? So you need to have better RTO and RPO calculations. And in cloud environments, as I've already mentioned, that in single click, you can have an entire disaster recovery plan in place, and your entire infrastructure can be backed up in a couple of hours. So how do you calculate those RTO and RPO calculations? How do you have that in place? And iSECURE will help you with creating those business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans in this space. So now let's talk about achieving continuous compliance. So iSECURE has created a 4-phase approach to complete the assessments, and then every phase reports and or the results are based on the next phase, are based for the next phase, so that we can do an in-depth and comprehensive analysis. So what is the first phase? So phase one is nothing but asset inventory or asset discovery, where we run the tools, we scan your infrastructure, and we provide a complete inventory of all the resources that you might have in your cloud infrastructure and provide it to them, because it's very difficult in the cloud infrastructure because of its dynamic nature to keep an asset inventory and mark up all the resources that you have in your infrastructure. In the second phase, now the asset discovery phase have already provided us with lots of information which we can utilize in identifying various misconfigurations for, let's say, any of the services that you have deployed in your cloud infrastructure. So in the phase two, we'll perform other scans and identify all the misconfigurations so that we can provide you as a remediation plan before the next phase, and you can work continuously on it before going to the next phase. And the phase three is nothing but cloud compliance assessment. We again run the tools based on the remediations that you have performed in phase two and check it against FFIEC, GDPR, NIST CSF, and Cloud Control Metrics version 4, and provide you with the best results and the compliance assessment. And phase 4 is nothing but cloud security posture management. So how does your cloud security posture looks now with all the phases and with all the remediations in place? And at the final, we generate a final report for you, which is according to your infrastructure and the testing results that we have found, and the collaboration of both iSECURE and your organization on how to remediate those as well. Now we are going to quickly show you a demo for achieving continuous compliance in AWS environments. So it's basically done by automation, whereas any of the resources, if those are misconfigured by mistake, then this automation workflow will automatically detect if the resource is compliant or non-compliant. And let's say if the resource is non-compliant, it will automatically go in the backend and start the remediation process without any human intervention. You just have to monitor it. Some things become non-compliant, the auto remediation workflow will kick in, and it will automatically remediate the resource in the backend, making it compliant. That's how you are going to achieve continuous compliance in AWS environments. And iSECURE has created an entire plan for that. So if you are AWS, then we are going to help you with